Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
You know, genius often gets misunderstood, and if you're within the sound of my voice, that must mean you're in the seats with once more. As always, my name is Dave Voigt, the host of this podcast, where we sit down with a wide-ranging variety of industry professionals and pick their brain on current projects, state of the business, influences, what got them started, anything else that we can really think of in a light and conversational fashion, because that's just how we do it over here. And if you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, and I certainly hope that you would, because you're listening to us right now, you can do that at a number of places where you can find your podcast, like Apple, like Spotify, like Amazon, what have you. And also you can find every single one of our episodes archived over at our YouTube channel. We'd also love it if you would check us out on social media, either at In the Seats or at It's Podcast One, for all sorts of fun updates. And finally, and I dare say most importantly, if you would visit us over at In the Seats, intheseats.ca, where we are pumping out all sorts of movie news, reviews, lists, and, well, anything else we can really think of under the sun, because we got a hardworking team over there, and we like to talk about things related to the moving image, and we hope you like reading it. And that's really all there is to say. And but that does, well, reading does come into this episode a little bit, because we are actually we're going to a little bit of a shift. We're going to talk about a book, a recent book that is available now on McFarlane Books, from author Wes Gehring. And it's Charlie Chaplin, A Woman of Paris, the genesis of a misunderstood masterpiece. And for those who don't know, A Woman of Paris is one of Chaplin's films, one of his sort of earlier period films from 1923. That it's one of those ones where he is trying to prove himself as a filmmaker and as an auteur, and he was really trying to sort of separate himself from the character of the Tramp, and it's really sort of lands in a very sort of interesting period of time in Chaplin's work, sort of right before some of the seminal pieces that most audiences know from his canon, like Gold Rush and City Lights and Modern Times and a couple of others. And we talked with Wes, who is he's a distinguished professor of film at Ball State University, and holds a number of jobs, but he's an interesting dude. And we sort of deep dived into the mythos of Charlie Chaplin, especially during this period in his life. And he's it's a fascinating talk, and he was a fascinating guy. And if you like to know a little bit more about Chaplin, especially, I guess, more deep dive Chaplin, as opposed to the stuff that is probably just sitting there on the surface, I would recommend you go check out this book. And but first, I would recommend you check out our talk with Wes, because I think it was a pretty good one. So I hope you enjoy. No, I mean, I guess my first question is because I actually got a chance to watch the film last night on the Criterion Channel, and I mean, I was really fascinated me, because I mean, even just going through sort of Chaplin's history and sort of this period in his life, and if I'm wrong, please correct me anywhere along the way, but this feels like it was his attempt to sort of uh, tell the world that he was more than just the Tramp. And I'm kind of curious, was that sort of the impetus for you to sort of start digging in and do the book? Because it's a fascinating time in his life.
Yeah, it really is. Really, what drew me to do the book was I, as I mentioned earlier in the text, I'd done a book on Buster Keaton,
Mm.
and supposedly the MO on this particular film was Chaplin decides he wants to do something a little more deep dish, and audiences liked it in the larger metropolitan areas, and the critics loved it, but in the hinterland or smaller communities, it didn't go over that much, and uh, you know, uh, he pulled it after a certain amount of time. But what I found in doing hardcore research on mid-range type cities, outside the suburbs, so to speak, um, people loved it. I mean, small town America loved it, medium-sized America loved it. They just didn't go to it, 60, 11 times. I mean, the Tramp films made a lot of money because people went to them dozens of times. In fact, a lot of his short subjects that were in public domain, different people kept reissuing them under different names and things like that. So I don't see a direct point from the beginning of his career to this film, but he really believed in the public could keep up with whatever he wanted to do. And so through the years, first there was the Chaplinitis when he was like, it was like Beatlemania.
Right.
Uh, and then he does a dark comedy during World War One, which everybody said is it's going to kill your career, and the public loved it. And then um, he does this movie called The Kid, which is about a baby born out of wedlock and all these kinds of things. And people were saying, "Yeah, you better not go there," and it was a huge hit. So he felt, even though a lot of people believe that this movie was too sophisticated or too adult for a 1922, 23 audience. Um, he wanted to go ahead and do it because in reading through all this stuff leading up to it, he kind of tested different things. He did a movie called, these are three movies he did before, shortly before. They're short subjects or maybe three reelers. He did one called The Idle Class, which showed an unhappy, wealthy husband. He did a movie called Payday, which was unusual for him. It was more like a Laurel and Hardy movie with kind of a wife with a rolling pin type thing, but he obviously was unhappy in that. And then he did a movie called Day's Pleasure, which was like a middle class type story. And again, an unhappy husband. And he sort of tested the idea of is everybody happy in their relationships, or am I going to get canned for having somebody in this particular movie, A Woman of Paris, be a mistress? And he wasn't finding that. And um, in the press leading up to this, there was almost a sense that if this movie had gone over in a huge way, he might have retired the Tramp and just ended up being like an Ernest Lubitsch, a sophisticated comedy director, writer kind of thing. And um, he ended up not doing that, but it's kind of was a mixed message for him because he was expecting, I suppose, blockbuster numbers like with the Tramp, but it's not the kind of movie that you would repeatedly see. And I think he didn't fully grasp that, or um, for whatever reason, he kind of panicked and went back. And his next film was The Gold Rush, which is the movie he ends up wanting to be remembered by. And that was like huge box office, but people saw it a zillion times. So I guess the point in doing it just was I was finding things in, in period articles that contemporary Chaplin historians were saying weren't true. Like each of those three movies I mentioned, The Idle Class, Payday, and A Day's Pleasure, contemporary historians say, they didn't go over very well. They weren't that all popular. What was poppycock? I mean, if you go back and look at these reviews, they were superlative. People loved those particular movies. I don't know where or at what point in time those were kind of jettisoned as being, popular and things like that. So it just kind of, I didn't pick it out. He kind of picked me out. I just wanted to, in a sense, rewrite history because they got it wrong. And I'll give you an example. Like, they were talking about provincial audiences and stuff. I'm originally from Iowa, so I checked out one of the first things I checked out. Well, how did the Des Moines Register handle this? A Woman of Paris, and they gave it a rave. They just said, "You're going to see Charlie Chaplin's name, but don't expect the Tramp. So, maybe don't take the kids to it, but it's a wonderful movie. Go see it." And even all the high profile Chaplin scholars were saying, oh, the, the Midwest say the flyover states, they killed it. They didn't like it. They liked it. And it actually did make money. It made more money in Europe, but it made money and people went to see it. They just didn't see it like a zillion times. It's sort of like I'm a grandpa now, but I have two grown daughters now. But when they were in their um, like teen years was around the time the Titanic came out, and
Mm.
I must have taken them to that movie a half a dozen times. They just couldn't get enough of that particular movie. So I think the same phenomena was going on with A Woman of Paris. It got rave reviews, and I'm sure some people saw it again, but it was not conducive maybe to seeing it, lots of times. And then the other follow-up thing was, um, if you read contemporary film history now, Chaplin did pull it relatively early, but and in those days, it wasn't like Blockbuster Friday now. We didn't get saturation booking until like
Right.
about the time of Jaws. So a movie might open in New York in December, and it might not hit Chicago or Indianapolis until 2 or 3 months later, or something like that. So this movie circulated all over for a number of years, got good reviews all over, and made money. It just didn't make Charlie Chaplin Tramp money, and so I think he uh, was enamored of being, more of a high profile, money making, popular, whatever. And then the other thing was he always wanted to be, you know, prove himself as a dramatic actor. Well, in The Kid, he got the kind of reviews that people said, you know what, I wouldn't have believed this, but he's an actor. He's a great actor, even though he's wearing the tramp costume. They kind of peeled away the issue of, okay, I have to play a non-tramp figure to become to prove that I'm a good actor. Not so much. The Kid pretty much proved that, and then the Idol class, a movie he'd done shortly before that as kind of like a test pattern for Unhappy Husband, as a mistress viable kind of thing. Um, he was testing himself in a non-Tramp kind of role, and he's top hat and tails and things like that. He could have been playing the Adolphe Maju character in A Woman of Paris. And then the other thing that nobody seems to recognize was it didn't shock people. You go back and all kinds of critics in high profile publications and in small town publications. Everybody just assumed that Adolphe Maju was essentially Charlie Chaplin in his private life. So they weren't really shocked by it or anything like that. And so it was, it sounds like I'm saying, hey, I've really done something, but I think I have. I mean, nobody seems to go back to the original sources. They just kind of repeat what Joe Blow wrote in 1950 and then da 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 da. But these original sources, and I looked at a lot of material. Um, don't tell this. It's I make an analogy in the end of my book about how the flyover states don't get any respect, and I started the epilogue with uh, a quote from Harold and Maude that, and then I said, this could have been, if it would have been a sound film, could have appeared in A Woman of Paris. And uh, then a page or two later, when Harold and Maude came out, it got trashed on the coast and bad reviews and da 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 da. And it 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 so happens that there was a theater in Minneapolis that played it for 105 straight weeks from day one. And uh, finally, one of the New York papers, after Harold and Maude was starting to be recognized as something unique, a unique cult film by 2 or 3 years after it came out, they had to admit that actually the Midwest discovered it immediately, understood it, no problems, it's a great
Yeah.
movie and stuff like that. So I was sort of, by the end of the book, I was almost getting to be an advocate for the flyover states because it's like they got it. I mean, they just didn't go in mass numbers. Nobody went in mass numbers because it's not conducive to, say, the funniest movie ever made. I'm going to go see this 6 times or something. But it's an excellent film. And I think the other thing that threw people too was just the fact that it was so ahead of its time in its minimalist use of everything. I mean, uh, he shot it in such a manner that I was actually finding earlier reviewers comparing it to like neorealism and stuff, but just because he wanted to make it as simple as possible. There are a couple pivotal parts that were actually played by non-performers. Um, he wanted to, his favorite expression when he would direct his actors is, remember, they're peeking at you, you know? So
Yeah.
he wanted to keep it really basic. So a lot of, it's like when I teach my classes, formalism is anytime a filmmaker puts his signature on his film through slow motion, speeded up motion, jump cuts, uh, uh, gradations of color and stuff like that. Realism is you pick a subject and you play with ambiguity, and it's friggin' hard to teach. But you know, John Ford say is a great realist. You know, Monument Valley. You don't need to do all kinds of whatever. You've got your setting, and Charlie Chaplin wanted that same kind of. He wanted to do a slice of life. So he anticipates people like the French New Wave and everything else by decades. And uh, it got picked up so quickly, that kind of filmmaking,
Mm.
that it's like anything else. You read and read and read about, say, Citizen Kane or something, and you watch the movie and say, okay, yeah, it was a good movie, but you forget that it's been cherry picked, you know, for 50 years or 60 years. And the same thing with Chaplin. All of this more realistic slice of life stuff got picked up very, very quickly. And so that's another way it doesn't get. I'm being Rodney Dangerfield here. It doesn't get any respect, you know, kind of like. So, and then when it was reissued in '78, they repeated all of those same mistakes. You know, oh, Middle America didn't like it, and you know, uh, just things like that. So, I just felt it was. I was almost on a mission. The book kind of wrote itself in a way, and I was just having a lot of fun digging into the archive, so to speak, and a couple research engines and stuff. And nowadays, you can really cross section. You know, what did they say in Sioux City, Iowa? What did they say in Podunk Center, anywhere? And they weren't saying what history books are saying now about the film. Almost everybody liked it. And here's another one for you. He first got this on shortly before he did this film. He did a film called The Pilgrim, where he escapes from prison, and there's a preacher that's skinny dipping somewhere and left his clothes on the bank. Well, Charlie Chaplin takes his clothes, and now everybody thinks he's a preacher. Well, if you read history texts now, they say, "Oh, it was banned in Pennsylvania, and it caused all kind of controversy and stuff like that." When you go back and look at that when it came out, uh, you'll find stuff like, yeah, these, you know, 35 preachers are saying this is blasphemy and stuff like that. And then the article will end with screening times for the film are at 4 and 6 and 8 o'clock, you know, things like that. So I don't know. People have repeated mistakes through the years about a given subject. You
Well,
have
and
to go back to the,
it's
go
one
ahead.
of those. It's one of those. It feels like one of those films that was almost art house before art house. I mean, you can look at so many different directors. I mean, like John Ford just came to mind. You say John Ford, people think John Wayne in a 10-gallon hat and The Searchers, but he has done so many different other kinds of films.
Oh
This
yeah,
really felt like Chaplin was trying to sort of carve out his own space as an auteur as opposed to just
yeah.
comedian.
It's sort of like the beginning of what I would call like a sophisticated comedy of sorts, with, you know, with some tragic overtones to it, but still, uh, the Adolf Maju character. I mean, it made his career. He ended up playing that type of character for the rest of his career. But um, Lubitsch has uh, credited it for completely influencing what his do. The power of suggestion. You know, you don't have to show everything. You can kind of demonstrate. The scene that everybody writes about in A Woman of Paris is the scene where Adolphe Maju comes over to uh, 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 Edna Proviance's house, and they're waiting for the day, but she's primping
Okay.
and stuff like that. So um, he decides to have a drink, pours himself a drink. Is very casual in the setting, and but then he realizes he forgot his handkerchief, so he goes in her bedroom, and she's still primping, and he opens one of the drawers and gets out a handkerchief, and that scene, without doing anything else, demonstrates that, oh, this is his mistress. He sleeps over a lot or occasionally, you know, um, that kind of thing, which now is synonymous with the Lubitsch touch and the minimalist kind of implications. Chaplin was doing that, and Lubitsch. A lot of people are saying, "Oh no, Lubitsch was doing it before." Well, he might have been doing some variations of it, but I have interviews with Lubitsch where he said, "I got it from him," and Chaplin does, variations on that before this film even. In that one movie that I mentioned, The Idol Class, um, Chaplin's character plays a unhappy husband, and his wife sends him a note and says, "If you don't stop drinking, it's over," and Chaplin reads the note, puts it down, and then he turns his back to the camera, and he seems to be crying. He seems to be kind of just boohooing so hard that his shoulders are going up and down and everything like that. And then he casually kind of turns around and he's just shaking a martini container. Um, and that says it all. He doesn't care if his wife has concerns about his drinking. He does what he does. And it was done in such a manner that you didn't have to draw a picture for anybody. He was shaking a martini shaker. So uh, anyway, it was a movie ahead of its time, and then everybody picked up on it, and it doesn't seem maybe as eye-opening as it once was, but it was. People were calling it the movie of 100 years from now. I mean,
Really?
yeah, yeah. I mean, they said I found one piece in the L.A. Times. I think it was the Times, saying something like the lead paragraph was, "If you want to know what movies are going to look like in a century, just go see A Woman of Paris." Uh, so it got phenomenal reviews, but it just got pulled earlier because Chaplin didn't think it was doing the business that it should have been doing. But it was doing fine in the non-huge metropolitan areas. And so that was one of my points. And my another point of mine was, that old uh, uh, H.R. Mencken, I think, said something along the lines of you can never lose money by underestimating
Yeah, no,
the intelligence of the individual. Well, Chaplin was adamantly opposed to that. He felt the public could keep up with him. And he seemed to have proved that by doing a dark comedy when dark comedy wasn't supposed to work, and by doing um, uh, a movie about a woman out of wedlock and the kid, and you know uh, being a big success. And his audiences was they were following him, and they actually followed him with this. He just expected more volume, I guess. I don't know, but he was very respectful of his audience. In fact, the original title of this film was called Public Opinion, um, and it was his way of, I guess, in a sense, suggesting that the public would go to it. And for the rest of his days, he basically claimed it was a good film, and people did follow it. And in the 1930s, when he was trying to write something for his third wife, Paulette Goddard, um, he at different points in time in different interviews in the 30s, he talks about the film and talks about maybe he should rewrite it in a slightly different sound version for his third wife and things like that. And that's another thing contemporary history texts are saying. Oh yeah, once he put it away, he never looked at it again until very, very late in his life. Not true. I mean, he was looking at the original script, and probably some of the changes that eventually, when he did reissue it later on, probably were happening in the late 20s and early 30s. He was tweaking with it then. So I just feel like, I've made people see or something like that, because it's like this. I've done like 40 books, and you always want to interview people. But if you interview somebody late in their career, I've done several books on Red Skelton, and his first wife wrote much of his great material. Red Skelton would have been a star anyway. But in the early interviews, he gives all of his credit to this great material that his first wife wrote for him. And late in life, when he's gone through two or three more wives and stuff, he takes all the credit for having done that. And that's typical. I'm not knocking him. I think as we get older, your uncle who was the backup quarterback is an all-stater by the
of
time he's
course,
80.
right? Yeah, yeah.
That is just a typical kind of thing. So to me, I mean, I still do interviews with filmmakers and stars and stuff like that, but the real truth is hidden away in those early articles. It's It's sort of like that old joke about filing cabinets. It's where you lose things alphabetically. They're not that hard to find, but you gotta dig a little bit, and go back and find the material. And that's where you get the real truth about the movies.
Well, this feels like the part of his canon that's probably like just below the surface that the masses have probably forgotten about because I mean, it when I was watching it, I almost felt similarities to Limelight in a weird way because it's really him sort of establishing a visual style and it's him trying to be sort of a very distinctive storyteller, which again, from the I mean, as beautiful as films like, Modern Times and City Lights are, people still focus on him. They don't necessarily focus on him as a storyteller and as a director, which I think is a bit of a crime, to be honest.
Yeah, and you make a good point with Limelight. I mean, the young lady in that, he asks kind of subtextually, but uh, he thinks maybe her inability to walk, her paralysis in her legs was possibly caused by a venereal disease or something like that. I mean, he
Mm,
kind of makes that implication, and he deals with adult material, and we know so much more about his life and how lots of uh, issues that had never come out before were true. I mean, that was in a sense why his beloved mother, lost her mind. I mean, she was suffering from late term venereal disease. Uh, in London at that period, 1 out of 4 women were forced into at least periodic uh, prostitution just to make ends meet. And
yeah,
by the end of his career, he had very much elevated his father, who gets trashed all the time for leaving the mother. But she was as talented as she was and as great a mother as she was rather promiscuous. And in Limelight, when you look at Limelight, um, his father died of alcoholism, and that was blamed on him being not a good father and not, uh, you know, not making, not only not making being a good father, but ruining his career because he was a very high profile performer in the 1890s.
mhm,
And Charlie Chaplin's character in Limelight was once a very popular performer who, because of drinking caused by a promiscuous wife or lover, had fallen out of the limelight and was largely forgotten. So, Limelight is set at a time period in that people look forward to where Chaplin was going. But if you take the time period of um, uh, going backwards in time a little bit, you actually hit the 1890s, and in a lot of ways, his character in Limelight is arguably maybe his father, who
yeah,
became an alcoholic because he had this wife who was promiscuous. Even they were going to get married, and she ran off with somebody else, got pregnant, came back, and he still married her. And then I don't know how this happened, but she wanted to name the child Chaplin's older brother, Sidney, after the guy that got her pregnant. And for some reason, Charlie Chaplin Sr. goes, okay, and uh, but this, from my research, this happened more than once, and that's why he basically left her. It was, you can only push somebody so far,
right.
and that's what happened. So yeah, uh, there's a direct line to Limelight. So great point.
No, and you know what? It's one of those things because I mean, I'm always fascinated, especially when you get to do deep dives. I mean, these days, given sort of the amount of content that's out there just on places like Criterion, to be able to look into and really sort of explore some of the older masters like Chaplin, because I mean, it's one of those things where he was so much more than sort of the image that sort of the pop culture masses think of him. And he was this very complex but like brilliant artist at the same time that was a little bit tortured also, to be quite
Oh
frank.
yeah, very much so. And again, an insight from my research was just the fact that people directly related him to the Adolph Maju character. That wasn't some big surprise that Adolphe Menjou is he has a mistress. In fact, you would read reviews, better to have a mistress that you take care of than a wife that you mistreat or something like that. I mean, that was right in a lot of reviews, that kind of justification or that
Yeah.
kind of whatever. So, uh, it was just a different time, and by setting it in France, America's always cut France some slack because they feel like, oh, they're more, sophisticated or something like that. But um, America was fine with this particular movie. It just wasn't fine in box office terms like the Gold Rush or the Circus or Modern Times or something like that. But
And you're right. If it was a woman of Wyoming, it wouldn't have necessarily worked quite as well.
No, no, not at all. And plus, another thing that was of interest with this was he never did any, as much of a ladies' man as he never was romantically involved in any of his films um, while he was in production because he was just totally focused, except for A Woman of Paris. And I had a hypothesis that he was just doing research. And one of my greatest discoveries is one of the women, the first foreign actress ever to make it in Hollywood was Pola Negri, and she was one of the actresses that he dated. And she literally says in an interview after they broke up that it was just a laboratory romance, that Chaplin was just, trying to find out information for his character. So I literally had it in print. My idea was true. So to say this is just Charlie Chaplin at a point in his career where he took Peggy Joyce Hopkins' Gold Digger story is totally false. And then the final thing, and I really had angst for Edna Purviance, was his leading lady in all of his short subjects, and they
Yeah.
were lovers in the beginning, and then he outgrew her. He went on, even though he kept her in his movies and stuff like that. And the sad, poignant part of the movie is she's basically playing the part that she played in real life. She was a pretty simple, nice young lady coming to Hollywood. She gets involved with a wealthy, powerful man because it becomes his mistress, and then gets cast aside, even though she keeps working with him. She has to relive that on screen.
Yeah.
So her performance is, even though her career didn't go anywhere after that, it must have been incredibly difficult for her to play that part because she was essentially playing her part from real life in that particular movie. So, and that never gets credited either. So,
No, it's so true because I mean, it was a really sort of, I mean, especially for a guy like Chaplin, this was such a pivotal and sort of interesting time. And I mean, I just want to say thank you for the time today, and just thanks for
well, sure.
shining a little bit of light onto this artist and this character who, like, as much as we think we know, unless you when you start digging below the surface, there's so very much more to a
Oh
guy like
yeah.
Charlie Chaplin.
Yeah, yeah, and people just think of the Dickens-esque kind of scenario, but they
Right.
forget early on in his career, one of the points I wanted to make was just that he lived that other life for a short time when he was very young.
Yeah.
And if you look at a Dickens story, how do they start? They always start like they're wealthy, and then the young kid gets snatched away. So it's actually still true to Dickens. So,
Yeah, very much so. But thanks again for the time, man. This was a lot of fun. Appreciate
well,
you.
I enjoyed that. I appreciate you thinking of me. So have a good day.
All right, you too, Wes. Cheers.
Bye bye.
Bye. And don't forget to visit our friends over at Bay Street Video for all your DVD, Blu-ray rental, or purchasing needs this summer, as they are still open for curbside and some mailing delivery as well. Over at 1172 Bay Street, Toronto, Ontario, Canada, you can give them a call at 416-964-9088. That's 416-964-9088. Or send them an email at baystreetvideoto@gmail.com for any of your DVD and Blu-ray needs.